morning, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you Hogwarts Legacy for the Nintendo Switch. Before we continue, I thought I should warn you that I am almost recovered from my cold that I mentioned in my previous review. I just have a really bad cough. Sore throat's all gone, but now there's just a persistent cough. So if my voice goes in and out of warbling, that's why. Even just saying I'm reviewing to you Hogwarts Legacy is mind-blowing to me because I love Harry Potter so much. I have a day one copy of Deathly Hallows. Fun fact, it's the only book I've ever pre-ordered, so that should tell you something about how much I love Deathly Hallows even more than any other book, not just Harry Potter book. However, the Harry Potter video games have been very hit or miss, with most of the community saying that they're not that great. I think the popular consensus is that Order of the Phoenix was one of the better ones because it tried its best to have an accurate recreation of Hogwarts, and it got a decent amount of the original actors to reprise their role. The only Harry Potter game to date to do that, which is really bizarre. Why did it take them so long? But Hogwarts Legacy promised to be the Harry Potter game to turn the tables. It was, well, on the other platforms at least, an open world adventure where you could not only freely explore Hogwarts, but other iconic locations outside of the castle, such as the Forbidden Forest, the Black Lake, Hogsmeade. But even beyond that, there was the wider world around Hogwarts, so you could go to other wizarding villages and go up mountains and other forests, and it was quite the massive undertaking. And so people were worried, how is it going to hold up on the Switch? And I think the developers realized this because they delayed the Switch version quite significantly to make sure that it was optimized to the best of its ability. I personally think they massively succeeded, as this game still looks gorgeous, plays for the most part really well, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's talk about what the game actually is. So this takes place in the 1800s, well before even Voldemort and Dumbledore were around. So it's not so much a Harry Potter game as it's more of just a Wizarding World game. You get to choose your own character, and the character customization options are, for the most part, really expansive. You can customize pretty much everything. Here's the caveat, though. They wanted to make sure that trans and non-binary people didn't feel left out, so you can't actually customize your proportions. You can customize your voice. There's a male and a female voice, and you can adjust the pitch, so if you're like me and have a bit of a high-pitched voice, you can choose the female voice, but then choose to sleep in the wizard's dorm. Honestly, I thought that the pitch changer probably could have been better optimized, as it felt like if the pitch was higher or lower than the default voice that the actor or actress spoke in, it would sound very much like a machine had artificially hired, if that's a word, or lowered the voice, and it sounded very jarring in the cutscenes, especially with all of these other actors sounding perfectly fine. The game prides itself on giving you the freedom to explore. Now, just in case you get too lost, you do have a guide on the map that tells you the exact steps you need to take to get to your quest objective, as well as just a general waypoint in 3D, just in case you're a rebel and want to get to the destination your own way. It is an absolute joy to see what Hogwarts and the grounds and Hogsmeade look like, because after so much time imagining them in the books and only sort of seeing shots of them in the movies, it's great to see that Hogwarts actually looks even better than I imagined them in the books. I always pictured Hogwarts being this very drab, dungeon-like place where the walls were dark and everything was lit by torches and the occasional window. But in Hogwarts Legacy, there's lots of carpeting and paintings and tapestries. It really feels like a pleasant, cozy place to live in. There's even little benches around where the students can just sit on and talk to each other. You can listen to passing conversations. They repeat over time, but the first time around it's really cool. Most of the paintings move. There are a few exceptions, but I think that's a Switch limitation. Sometimes you can hear conversations with the ghosts. Peeves will show up, and he rhymes, as usual. What I liked about Peeves is that he sounded pretty much exactly how I imitated him when I read the books to my sister, so that's pretty cool. I didn't expect him to be all colorful. I thought he was transparent like the ghosts were, but I guess since he's a poltergeist, I suppose he's the exception to the rules. Well, most of the time you can just walk through any door and continue walking. Every now and then you'll reach a door where a buffering symbol appears upon it, and then you'll have to wait for the door to open. This is even more jarring when the students will just walk right through the door and you're still stuck there waiting for it. Apart from that little nitpick, it's a blast to explore Hogwarts. And I just loved finding all the little nods and Easter eggs. And there are even these field pages that you can collect that give you more information about iconic, or in some cases landmarks you didn't know existed but were probably there. Rowling just didn't get around to explaining them. Hogsmeade was also really cool because I always pictured it as being kind of empty, the way that the movies portrayed it. But in the game, it's like a very lively, pleasant wizarding village where there's so many shops that most of them weren't even described in the books. And there's like other landmarks too, like a river and hills. One thing that's a bit unfortunate is that Hogsmeade is kind of its own area, so you have to load into the area as opposed to just being able to freely walk in like you could in the other versions. In addition, there are also loading screens every time you go in and out of the shops, so that made me dread going shopping. For the most part, it was really cool seeing most of the shops fully realized. I loved going inside the 3 broomsticks and the Hog's Head, and seeing that they're so much more elaborate and so much brighter than how I envisioned them in the books. Again, for some reason I seem to always think that everything is drab. Maybe it's a result of Half-Blood Prince and Deathly Hallows being just so visually dark. But like, everything is so brightly lit, and the shops just feel like they're so alive. Of course, the main thrill of going to Hogsmeade is that you're going to want to buy stuff, and thankfully there's more than enough shops to deliver. There's a potion shop, seed shop, broomstick shop. That's especially amazing once you get to be able to fly a broom. And it seems like their selections are pretty varied. The one disappointment I had is that Zonko's joke shop didn't let you buy anything. You can get free samples of some of the candy that gives you special effects, such as the pepper imps that let you temporarily breathe fire, but it would have been nice to purchase some stuff like maybe a trick wand or some fireworks. Maybe I was thinking too hard of the Weasleys' shop, so that was probably my fault for getting my expectations too high. As far as the other places that you can visit in the world, most of them weren't described in the books, so I didn't have as much fun exploring them, but it was still a joy to be able to see all of the breathtaking sights, and especially when you're like away from Hogwarts, to be able to move the camera and see Hogwarts in a distance and see the road that the students would have taken to get to Hogsmeade. It really is quite a beautiful game. Granted, there's a lot of pop-in, even more than Tears of the Kingdom, and certain landmarks are foggy in the distance, but otherwise this is still one of the most gorgeous looking games I've played on the Switch. I think it even looks better than Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and I think players that love exploring open worlds are probably going to like this even more than most open world games because of the various ways in which you can traverse. Your 2 default moving options are walking and running. This is a bit of an annoyance for me because apparently that's a thing in most open world games, where to trigger a run you press in on the left stick. At least you don't have to hold it down like you did in the Suicide of Rachel Foster. But it did feel quite counterintuitive to have to press in the left stick as opposed to there being a dedicated jogging button. Of course, the real fun happens after you purchase a broom. No, that is not a spoiler because it literally says in the menu that there's brooms. So, unless if you really weren't paying attention when you were on the gear screen, that shouldn't be a spoiler to you. And besides, in the Harry Potter books, plenty of people ride on brooms, so you should know that by now. Anyway, Once you get a broom, the game becomes so much more fun. The broom controls are really, really good. You use the left stick to control your general trajectory, and the right stick to go up and down. You can hold down the right trigger to angle yourself forward, whereas if you don't, your character kind of just sits on the broom, and you can use that to reorient yourself and have more precise movements. And if you hold down the left trigger, then you can get a boost of speed. Of course, there's a meter to make sure you don't abuse this, but it's still so satisfying to be able to soar around the countryside and to have pretty much unlimited freedom. There are exceptions, like Hogsmeade, for example, doesn't let you fly in your broom. Hogwarts only lets you do it in the grounds, and there are certain areas that the game just says, hey, you can't go here while you're mounted. I think it's to prevent fall damage, honestly, because the game is pretty lenient on letting you jump from a high distance, but I guess it doesn't want you to jump from too much of a distance, as your character will kind of like prevent himself or herself from jumping off of the edge. But for the most part, the broom offers you so much freedom, and just in case you're like, oh, just flying in a straight line to my destination is too boring, there are flying trials in which you try to race against another student's records to like go through rings to increase your speed, and then go through even bigger rings that look like the keeper rings in Quidditch. And these are absolutely exhilarating. The music is utterly phenomenal. It feels so celebratory. The music in general is amazing, but especially when flying, it just feels so triumphant and really evokes the feel of some of John Williams' more discovery-oriented tunes in the Harry Potter movies. Of course, all this talk about exploring, and I still haven't even mentioned how spells work. You do your basic spell casting by pressing the right trigger, and if you want to be even more precise, you can press the left trigger to give a semi-first-person over-the-shoulder view where you can aim the reticle for more precise aiming. Sadly, you can't use gyro controls like you can in Tears of the Kingdom, but that's a small little nitpick, especially because the game auto-targets quite nicely. Like, if there's something in range of what you could cast a spell on, usually your character is pretty good at spotting it, and even if not, you can press in the right stick to lock on, and then move the right stick left or right to switch active targets, so it shouldn't really give you any problems. At first, I had trouble with it, but once I realized that if you see a white outline around something, it's auto-targeting, it alleviated most of my problems. But then you have what's called a spell set, where at first you have 4 spells that you can assign, and each one corresponds to a different button. You hold down the right trigger to indicate that you want to do a spell, and then press the corresponding button. Now, each spell can't be just used too much. You have to wait for the cooldown between spells, and if you try to do it too early, your character's wand will smoke, and you'll have a bit of a delay. These spells are in a few broad categories. There's transfiguration spells, there's force spells, which are like moving things backward, forward, downward, or upward. There's blasting spells, I forgot what they're categorized as, where they're basically used to like damage opponents in a fight. And then there's control spells, which I'm not really sure how to describe, but like one of them is Levioso, where it like makes the enemy hover in the air, or Glacius is somehow in this category, where it freezes enemies. Either way, there's a lot of spells, and most of them are the ones that you've come to expect from the books and movies, as well as a few surprise ones, like spells used to help take care of beasts and care of magical creatures, or as they call it, beast class, in this game. While there are a few spells that you can get by without, some of the quests require you to have some, and usually the game will say like, hey, you need this spell before you can proceed on the quest, so you're not absolutely stuck. And they have quite a wide variety of uses. I don't want to spoil most of them, but let's just say that spells that you thought were only one way in the books have some really creative uses in this game. Of course, the other way spells come into play is when you're in a battle. Usually you'll face quite a lot of enemies at a time, and if not, you'll face one giant enemy with a huge health bar. You'll need to, of course, find the right spells to do the most effective damage, as each enemy has certain weaknesses. Of course, I didn't really pay too much attention to these weaknesses. I just thought to myself, okay, based on my situation, which spells would be the most effective. Eventually I just settled on like my favorites and just stuck with that, as most of them got me through the game just fine. When you have like a levitating spell, you can do what's called juggling the enemy, where they're caught in the air, and then you can keep using spells on them and then juggle them again. According to the hints menu, you can keep juggling them indefinitely if you know what you're doing, and I was pretty darn good at it. You can also press the R button if there is a projectile nearby. Eventually, you can even knock the enemy's projectiles out of their hands and then fling them back at them, and it is very satisfying to do. You also have what's called an ancient magic meter, where if that fills up, then you can press L and R at the same time to unleash a super powerful magical attack. Thankfully, to avoid it from getting boring, there's different attacks depending on both the enemy, and also just it varies depending on how frequently you cast the spell. So like for spiders, you might summon them close to you and then shrink them so that you can stamp them out, or like batter an enemy against the ground, or even summon lightning. You can press the A button to roll out of the way of an attack, and if there's a red ring around you, then that means you have to roll out of the way. If there's an orange ring, then you can hold the X button to do Protego to get a shield to block it. You can just press the X button to do a regular block, but then you can also hold it down to counterattack with Stupefy. Stupefy not only stuns the enemies, but it can also break their shields. The only other way to break an enemy's shield is to hit it with a spell of the same color. So for example, if an enemy has a purple shield, then you'll need to use a purple spell. It's pretty self-explanatory, and the game makes some pretty clever uses out of this. Overall, I found the battles to be so much fun that I actually wished that the Deathly Hallows movie had done this game's approach to combat, as this is easily some of the best wand fights I've ever seen in the Harry Potter universe. And I feel like now that I know how they work in this game, it's going to make me see the books in an even cooler light now that I'm like, oh wow, this is like so fully realized. At first, the combat was really easy, but then I switched to the second hardest difficulty level, and it provided a nice balanced challenge. I felt like there were only like maybe 3 or 4 battles where I really had to keep resetting, but I found that as long as I practiced my Protego and my dodge roll, I was generally able to get through most combat encounters really well. Now you do have ways to offset your combat abilities. For instance, you can press down on the control pad to heal yourself with Wiggenweld Potion. I am really amazed that they kept that in, because Wiggenweld was first introduced in the games. So they even use the games as a broader source material. Of course, you only have so many Wiggenweld potions, so you gotta be careful. Then there's what's called your tool wheel, where if you hold down the L button, you can use various potions and plants to help you. So you can throw mandrakes at the enemies, you can drink potions to give you various effects. I honestly didn't really like this tool wheel. I thought it was too clumsy to hold down the L button to equip one, and then push the right stick in the right direction, and then release the L button while the stick is still being pressed. It's the same reason why I didn't like using the Emerald powers in Sonic Superstars. It was really only near the end of the game that I drank potions, because I wanted to be more effective against the really tough bosses, but for about 98% of the game I just ignored them. But it is nice to have options just in case you're overwhelmed. There are also quite a lot of caves and dungeons to explore. This is where the game gets a bit more linear in its progression, and you are more puzzle-oriented. Granted, there's still combat encounters in these to make sure that the best part of the game is still being preserved. But sometimes the game really makes you think, and there are some portal-level puzzles. None of them stumped me too hard, except for the optional quests. Generally speaking, you can press left on the control pad to do Revelio. This can be used outside as well, but I just forgot to mention it. Revelio lets you see any interactable objects even through walls, so sometimes if you're wondering what you're supposed to do, Revelio can reveal, oh, there's a switch over there, maybe I should press it. Generally speaking, the game does not hold your hand on these quests. Sometimes your main character will chime in with what he or she thinks you should do, but it's hardly ever just outright telling you the solution. It's just saying, hey, have you thought of it from this angle, and Revelio helps you be on the right track to figuring out what to do. There are a few other things you can do in your spare time, like making potions and fertilizing plants, but you need the right ingredients to do that. You usually need to be in a very specific place to do it. You can't just make them anywhere. That would be ridiculous, but this is the wizarding world. You could easily use conjuration. But regardless, I didn't really like this approach because each potion or plant has a specific time for how long it takes to brew, which is expected. You don't want to just rush something, but this is a video game. Why not do the Breath of the Wild approach where you can skip the cooking process and just get the meal right away? Generally speaking, I found that the game doesn't really like you skipping anything, as there are some cutscenes that just refuse to be skipped. Sometimes it felt like the game just felt like skipping the dialogue when I was pressing every button I could, and I just felt like it felt too much like a microtransaction game where you have to wait a certain while, and if you pay enough then you can get more. There is DLC for this game, but I didn't purchase any of it because most of it was cosmetic. A lot of it was also like arena type stuff, and it just wasn't interesting to me. But I do appreciate there being extra options for cosmetics. Speaking of which, you can customize the appearance of your main character by getting various cloaks and glasses and scarves. You can even choose to change your character's appearance without altering the stats, just like Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition allowed you to do. There's a lot of options here. I didn't really like experimenting too much because I liked my Hufflepuff pride. Yes, I was a proud Hufflepuff. And yes, the Hufflepuff common room was amazing to finally get a chance to see. But I'm glad that the option is there, even if I think that it's a bit of a wasted opportunity that you only have so many slots for gear, and if not, then you have to sell them at the shops. I think the reason why they did this is to make sure that you usually have enough gold to buy something that you absolutely need in order to progress the game. Sometimes these can be a bit arbitrary, like you have assignments from the professors that you need to do before they'll teach you a new spell. And I get it, this is trying to simulate the homework that the teachers would give in the books. I found it to be a little bit of padding, but that's open world games for you. They always got to find a way to make it bigger. Now that I've talked about most of the important stuff that aren't spoilers, let's get into the performance on the Switch. I'm not really much of a frame rate guy, so I'm not even going to touch that. I'm just going to talk about, does it run, is it slow or glitchy, that kind of stuff. Graphically, it's very impressive. Obviously, it doesn't look as good as the other games, but even when I was showing it to my friends in handheld mode, they were blown away by how good it looks. There's really good textures. Nothing feels like it was lazily slapped together. Like there's plenty of bricks on the roads. In Hogsmeade, you can see the individual bricks on the buildings, reflections on the floor. It's a very good looking game and even rivals some of the best looking Nintendo published games. There are a few pixelated textures on characters' hair. Sometimes there's pop-in, but most of it isn't too bad. The characters still look very realistic, even if I think the animations for the characters are a bit stiff. Like it seems like they're just puppets talking, and a lot of times their movements don't match up with what they're trying to say. But that's still quite a nitpick in the grand scheme of the characters still look much more realistic than anything an anime would do, or say the Professor Layton games would try to do. The game only had minimal slowdowns, and the only real glitches I discovered were sometimes if you jump where you're not supposed to, your character will get stuck in midair, though this never caused me to restart my game. Only once, actually, did I have to reload a save file, and that was that I was supposed to talk to a character, but the prompt to talk to the character didn't appear. I didn't have to actually restart the game, I just had to reload my save file. Other than that, I think the delay was well worth it. There is one major problem with the game, and that is probably going to be the deal breaker for getting it on the Switch over other platforms, and that's the incessant amount of loading screens. There's a loading screen every time you fast travel. There's a loading screen every time you go in and out of a building in Hogsmeade, going in and out of Hogsmeade itself, going in and out of Hogwarts. There's even mini loading screens when you try to go through the doors in Hogwarts, and they are long loading screens. They are very annoying and very frequent, and actually discouraged me from trying to go to Hogsmeade too much. So if the other platforms have more seamless options, you're probably going to want to get it there. However, the Switch has portability, and I love the ability to just play such a massive, good-looking game wherever I want. It's still kind of unreal that the Switch offers that. I absolutely adored Hogwarts Legacy. As a massive Harry Potter fan, it had enough Easter eggs and references to make me so giddy and pull out my capture button. I loved being able to fly around. The combat was really satisfying. The controls took some getting used to, but once I did get the hang of them, I felt like I was a master wizard. The exploration was a blast, especially after you got the broom. The story was okay. There was a neat twist near the end, but it's nowhere near the caliber of Rowling's storytelling. Still, they were able to cram in so many different stories and wrap them all together under one general idea, and I commend them for trying, even if I feel like the story feels more like a Skyrim story than it does an actual Harry Potter story. Still, it's better than most other Harry Potter fan fiction that I've seen, so kudos to them for putting in a lot of love and care and effort into making this probably the most accurate representation of Hogwarts in the wizarding world that you're going to see. I absolutely think that this is worth the asking price of $60, as you're getting such a huge world. You get 4 different main quests depending on what house you choose, and your choices do matter, allowing for various different outcomes. There are lots of stuff to collect. There's fully voice acted everything from the cutscenes to characters in conversations. The music is glorious and spectacular and manages to capture the whimsical nature of John Williams while also being able to be intense and epic during some of the battle sequences. I do think Hogwarts Legacy is one of the best games I've played on the Switch. And even though the Switch is obviously the inferior version, it's still more than doable as a fun experience that still manages to run and play and look really well despite its limitations. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Please let me know in the comments what you thought of the video and what are your thoughts on Harry Potter in general. Special thanks to my patrons Matthew Rakowski, Sploonghost, and Splatcat for their continued support on Patreon. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!